The hum of an airport lounge carried the usual chorus of rolling suitcases, chatter, and boarding calls, but behind the polished glass of Gate A17, a storm was brewing. A man in a sharp navy suit had just placed his boarding pass on the counter, unaware that the next few minutes would not only test his patience but shake the very reputation of a billion-dollar airline. He was not just any passenger. He was the CEO of a multinational tech company, flying to finalize a partnership worth $120 million. What happened next would change lives, reputations, and the course of an entire industry. The sun was setting beyond the wide panes of Los Angeles International Airport, streaking the terminal in gold. Travelers hurried between gates, balancing coffees, laptops, and restless children. Among them walked David Carter, a 42-year-old black executive whose rise from modest beginnings in Atlanta to the pinnacle of corporate leadership had been nothing short of remarkable. His life was a testament to discipline, intellect, and resilience. He had spent years building InnovateX, a cutting-edge software company that now powered digital systems for governments and Fortune 500 firms alike. David moved with the ease of a man accustomed to pressure but never complacent. His immaculate suit carried quiet authority, and his carry-on contained sensitive contracts for an airline partnership. This wasn't just another business trip. If successful, InnovateX's deal with Aerosky Airlines would bring in $120 million over 5 years, strengthening his company's global presence and reshaping how airlines handled customer data. He arrived at the gate early, having been upgraded to first class as part of his corporate arrangement. Though David frequently traveled for work, he still relished those quiet moments before boarding, when the noise of life softened and anticipation filled the air. Yet beneath the calm exterior, he carried the weight of history, the awareness that every room he entered, every table he sat at, he often stood as the only black executive, the only one who looked like him. He was used to stares, whispers, even subtle dismissals. But nothing prepared him for what would unfold on this flight. The boarding announcement called for first-class passengers. David stood, offered a polite nod to the attendant, and handed over his boarding pass. His seat, 1/8, awaited him. He stepped into the jet bridge, appreciating the brief silence after the terminal's chaos. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin gleamed with plush leather seats, gleaming fixtures, and a quiet atmosphere. He placed his bag in the overhead bin and sat, stretching his legs, allowing himself a small smile at the thought of the important meetings ahead. But then it happened. A middle-aged white man, impeccably dressed, approached the seat beside him. His expression shifted almost instantly from polite neutrality to discomfort, then to irritation. The man leaned toward the flight attendant and muttered something inaudible. Within moments, the attendant walked briskly to David. Her words were careful, yet her tone betrayed an underlying bias. "Sir, there appears to be some confusion. Could I see your boarding pass again?" David raised an eyebrow but handed it over without hesitation. "Seat 1A. Confirmed. Fully valid. Fully purchased under corporate agreements." The attendant's forced smile lingered as she glanced between him and the other passenger. "There may have been a mistake. Please wait here while we sort this out." The other man, still standing, crossed his arms and muttered loud enough for David to hear. "There's no way I'm sitting here with him. Move him somewhere else." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. David felt the weight of countless moments from history echo in that single sentence, the dismissals, the exclusions, the belief that his presence was somehow an intrusion. He looked at the attendant, expecting swift correction, expecting fairness. Instead, she whispered something to her colleague and returned with a firm, rehearsed smile. "Sir, we're going to have to move you to business class. We've upgraded another passenger into your seat." It wasn't just a request. It was an order. In that moment, the cabin grew quieter. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, some watching with silent curiosity, others deliberately avoiding eye contact. David sat frozen for a heartbeat, the injustice slamming into him like turbulence. He had the ticket. He had the right. Yet here he was, being removed from his rightful seat to appease a man who couldn't bear to share space with him. David's jaw tightened. His heart raced, but his expression remained calm, his composure sharpened from years of navigating boardrooms where he was underestimated, doubted, or dismissed. He rose, adjusted his suit, and allowed himself to be escorted back to business class. But his mind was already racing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the plane lifted from Los Angeles, David reclined in his new seat. The hum of the engines could not drown out the roar of indignation in his chest. Every fiber of his being wanted to stand up, demand justice, force recognition of the blatant racism that had just unfolded. But he didn't. Years of experience had taught him patience, strategy, and the power of silence. He pulled out his tablet and began reviewing the details of his upcoming meeting. Ironically, it was with the very airline whose staff had just humiliated him. InnovateX's software promised to revolutionize Aerosky's entire customer management system, from reservations to security to in-flight services. David would be meeting with their executive board in New York to finalize terms. A deal of this scale would not only enrich his company but also solidify his influence in an industry notorious for its lack of diversity and leadership. But now, the irony weighed heavy. How could he, in good conscience, sign a deal with an airline whose frontline employees mirrored the very prejudices he had fought his entire career to dismantle? The hours passed, punctuated by the clinking of glasses, the faint chatter of attendants, and the steady rumble of the aircraft. David sat in silence, replaying the scene in his mind. The other passenger's sneer. The attendant's condescending smile. The quiet compliance of the surrounding passengers. He thought of his late father, a man who had worked 2 jobs to send him to college, who had always told him, "Son, you'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." Tonight, those words felt painfully true. As dawn broke and the skyline of New York glowed beneath the plane, David's decision crystallized. He would not allow this insult to pass. He would not just sit quietly and move on. No. He would make them remember. The car service whisked him from the airport to Aerosky's headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper piercing the Manhattan skyline. Inside, executives waited, eager to discuss the final stages of a deal that would shape the future of their airline. David walked into the boardroom with the same quiet authority he carried onto the plane the night before. His suit pressed, his gaze unwavering, his silence calculated. The CEO of Aerosky, Richard Hamilton, extended a hand. "David, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here." David accepted the handshake but held eye contact just long enough to unsettle the room. He placed his tablet on the table, opened the presentation, and began. For the next hour, he spoke with precision, outlining how InnovateX's systems would streamline operations, reduce delays, and enhance customer satisfaction. The executives nodded, took notes, and whispered to each other. They were impressed, perhaps even relieved. This deal would save them millions and give them an edge over competitors. As the presentation ended, applause filled the room. Richard leaned forward. "David, this is exactly what we've been hoping for. I think we're ready to move forward with the $120 million partnership." The words hung like an invitation, a door wide open. And yet, David did not step through. Instead, he closed his tablet, folded his hands, and let silence stretch across the room. Finally, he spoke. "Last night, on one of your flights, I was removed from my first-class seat. Not because of any error. Not because of any policy. But because another passenger demanded I not sit beside him. And your staff complied." The room shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted. Some gasps escaped. Richard's face paled. David continued, his voice measured but cutting. "You want me to entrust my company's software to an airline that cannot even entrust a black man with the seat he paid for? You want me to commit $120 million to a system that claims to prioritize customer experience, yet your own employees undermine that very principle?" The silence was deafening. No one dared speak. David leaned back. "So tell me, do you still think we're ready to move forward?" The air in the boardroom turned heavy, charged with unspoken tension. Executives shifted, their earlier confidence now shaken by the weight of David's words. Richard cleared his throat, searching for the polished composure that had carried him through decades of leadership, but even he could not mask the unease. "David, I assure you this was an isolated incident," he stammered. "It doesn't reflect our values as a company." But David was not swayed. His gaze was unwavering, his voice steady. One incident is all it takes to reveal the truth. An airline that allows prejudice to dictate its service is an airline that has failed at its most basic responsibility: safety, dignity, respect. Without those, your values mean nothing. Murmurs rippled around the table. Some executives shifted in agreement, others in embarrassment. Richard attempted to salvage the moment. "We can investigate, we can take disciplinary action." "But surely this partnership—" David raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "This partnership was meant to symbolize progress, innovation, and trust. But how can I trust a company that cannot even defend me in the seat I rightfully earned?" The weight of his words crushed the room into silence. The deal, once celebrated, now hung by a thread. Richard's desperation grew. "David, please. Think of the possibilities. Think of the impact your technology could have. We want to move forward, and we'll do whatever it takes to make this right." But David shook his head. "No. What happened last night is bigger than this deal. It's about the message it sends. If I sign today, I tell the world that dignity can be bought. That $120 million is enough to excuse racism. And that is something I will never accept." The finality of his words landed like a gavel. David gathered his belongings, stood, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind stunned silence. His polished shoes echoed down the marble hallway, each step carrying the weight of history, justice, and defiance. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. Within days, media outlets picked up the story. Headlines blazed across screens and newspapers. Black CEO rejects $120 million deal after airline racism. Commentators debated, activists applauded, and ordinary people felt seen. For many, David's stand was not just about a seat on a plane. It was about centuries of being told to move, to step aside, to accept less. And here was a man who refused. Aerosky scrambled to control the damage. They issued statements, promised investigations, suspended employees. But the damage was done. Stock prices wavered, public trust faltered, and competitors pounced on the scandal. The $120 million they hoped to secure vanished in a moment of arrogance and prejudice. Meanwhile, David returned to his offices at InnovateX, greeted not by defeat but by admiration. Employees hailed his courage, investors praised his integrity, and clients trusted him even more. By sacrificing profit for principle, he had not lost. He had won something greater. Months later, at a tech conference, David spoke before an audience of thousands. His words resonated far beyond the stage. Racism is not just a moral failure. It is a business failure. It costs companies money, reputation, and trust. The moment you compromise dignity for convenience, you lose both. The applause thundered, and as he stepped off the stage, David felt a sense of peace. He had not only stood his ground. He had forced an industry to reckon with itself. The question that lingered for everyone who heard his story was simple yet piercing. How many more deals, how many more opportunities, have been lost to the quiet, corrosive force of prejudice? And when will we decide that the true cost of racism is one no company, no institution, and no society can afford to pay?